So now we're going to talk about those specific ways to relate your evidence to your claim, and we're talking about reasoning. Reasoning's how we figure things out in the world. It's how we determine what we believe. We determine what's true and what's not true, what's fact and what's fiction. It's how we determine whether opinions are supportable or not. It's reasoning, and we need to know how to do it so that we don't get taken advantage of. So there's two basic kinds of reasoning. You have deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is a fact-based connection with things that are kind of already known. You already know that this is good or bad, and you're connecting it with something else. You're connecting facts. It's deductive reasoning. And then you have inductive reasoning. That's where it's not necessarily known. There's not a clear answer, and you have to reason out that answer using data or evidence, and there's no clear answer. So there's lots of scenarios that you might use deductive and inductive reasoning, right? If you often use clearly related facts to deduce a conclusion, this is clearly deductive reasoning. You're connecting facts. You might use observations or some specific examples to convince someone that a theory is true or useful. You use ideas and observation to help create a truth when a truth is really not already clear. So deductive reasoning, you kind of have clear facts that should lead to a clear conclusion. And inductive reasoning is not as much of a clear conclusion as something that you really need to convince or create. Clear path, very simple. All mammals are warm-blooded. Humans are mammals. Okay, so if humans are mammals and all mammals are warm-blooded, then clearly humans must be warm-blooded. That is a deductive reasoning path. Whereas inductive reasoning, sometimes you have to make some assumptions. It's February 14th. Man's buying flowers and chocolates. You can inductively reason that he's buying Valentine's gifts. It's not clear. There's no clear path. He might be buying flowers and chocolates because he's hungry, or maybe he works for a restaurant. It might not be for his significant other. It's not as clear. You're kind of drawing some conclusions. That's inductive reasoning. It was clear here. This is not as clear. There are multiple possibilities, and you are reasoning just one. In inductive reasoning, you're making observations, you're collecting data, you've got these details, and you're going to develop a theory or an idea. You're making details connect to something they may not very clearly connect to. It's inductive reasoning. It involves a little more thinking and reasoning and some opinions, but still you have that evidence, those observations and some data. You have the evidence. It's just not as clear a connection as you get in deductive reasoning. All right, and here's some common patterns of reasoning, paths that you can follow when you're trying to convince somebody, and a lot of these are involving comparisons. Argument from analogy. Okay, that's when you see a situation that is very similar to yours, that the idea already applies to, such as if we're talking about the revolution of the planets around the sun. We know Earth revolves around the sun. We know planets revolve around the sun because of these factors of gravity and Newton's laws of motion. And we know there are other planets. So if Earth follows this path, and Mars and Venus and Jupiter, then you can say, okay, all these planets. If you discover another planet, you can easily convince someone through analogy that it's a planet, it's in our solar system, it's going to revolve around the sun in this certain way. An established rule. So there's already a rule in place that talks about something that's very similar to what you're talking about, and so you just have to connect what you're talking about to this item that already has a rule. And that's very similar to analogy and very similar to arguing from what we call precedent. There's something that's happened before that's already accepted. You just have to make that connection. And this is often used when we talk about court cases. You would hear this talking about the Supreme Court, the court systems of America often rely on precedent, decisions that were made before, and you just have to connect your situation to that previous situation that there's already an existing rule for. So when you already have an established practice or an existing rule or a situation that is very similar to yours that the decision has already been made for, then all you're doing is you're comparing or connecting your situation to a situation that has already been decided. Pretty easy argument. You just have to convince someone that your situation does indeed apply, just like that already established rule or that precedent. You're finding that situation. You are making the connection for the person that you're arguing with. You have to show that that reasoning's already been agreed upon. You just have to connect your situation. Some other patterns are arguing from consequences. Okay, so you want to show these consequences, and then you want to show the connections between those consequences and what you're arguing. Like, if you jump off a bridge, you can use a theory of gravity and other theories to show, hey, you're going to get hurt. There's going to be a problem, right? That's arguing from consequences. You want to connect your consequences with this reasoning to your claim, to your argument. Arguing from expert opinion. So you show that there's experts that are in a position to, really know what they're talking about, that support what you're talking about or your theory, and you need to convince somebody that these experts are experts and that they support your ideas. So it is indeed your job as the arguer to connect your data or your evidence with these experts and connect that to your claim. So you got to convince somebody that these people are experts, convince them that they're on your side, and convince them that it all makes sense. Argument from popular practice. So in this case, you're just showing that a large percentage of people, are the majority, already agree with you or are already doing or thinking what you are arguing. So in this case, you're showing that most people are already doing it. You're connecting your idea to what most people are already doing. It's another one of those connections, and that is how you convince, or that is how you reason through connecting your evidence to your claim, through arguing that, hey, everybody's already doing it. Here's my evidence. This is what's showing that people are already doing it. Here's what connects it to what I want to do, and that is why you should believe me. Now, fallacies. These are problems. These are false reasoning. You want to avoid these because these don't work. They shouldn't work. They're falsehoods. They are not appropriate reasoning. They are not an appropriate connection of your evidence to your claim, and they leave you open to rebuttals. Using anecdotal evidence. You don't want to do that. You're substituting a story or personal experience for actual facts. You don't want to do that. You don't want to support an opinion with more opinions because you don't have any facts to back up your opinion. You definitely don't want to back up your opinion with other opinions. Another fallacy is drawing hasty conclusions. Okay, if you have a very, very small amount of evidence, you can't draw a conclusion based on a small amount. You need more evidence, like looking at a platypus and saying it's a bird because you see the duck bill and you say, oh, well, ducks are birds, the platypus must be a bird, but it's not, is it? No, there's all kinds of other reasons why it's not a bird, but you went to that hasty conclusion because you saw that duck bill. You don't want to argue a false cause. You don't want to argue that something has caused something without the evidence. This is essentially just arguing without evidence, and you don't want to do it. You must have evidence if you're going to argue. You definitely don't want to suppress evidence, right? If you've drawn a conclusion and maybe you've created your argument and you're in the counter-argument phase and you're like, okay, well, what does everybody else believe? And then you find that there is evidence to support that counter-argument. You don't want to leave that out in your argument because, once again, that's going to open you up to those rebuttals and people are going to win their argument. You don't want to appeal to an unknown authority. This is like saying, well, they said this and they said that. Well, who is they, right? You can't use an authority that is not known, right? With the reasoning pattern of expert opinion, you have to prove that they're experts. And in this case, you would have argued that someone was an expert or tried to and not been able to prove it, and that would be an unknown authority. And then once again, you are going to lose your argument, and likely in the rebuttal phase. Slippery slope. You may or may not have heard this, but it sounds exactly like what it is. It's when you argue that, okay, if this one little thing is going to eventually lead to this huge problem. And that's like saying, oh, if I'm on top of a mountain and I hit a little slippery patch, I'm going to go all the way down the mountain. Well, maybe you will and maybe you won't. Slippery slope is something you don't want to try and argue with because it's a fallacy of logic, because it's not showing that clear connection. An argument must show a clear connection between evidence and claim through reasoning, and this is not good reasoning. Stereotyping. You don't want to say just because something belongs to a group that it has every quality of that group. We know that's not true. We don't want to be stereotyped. You don't want to stereotype in your argument. So once again with our platypus, right? It's got a duck bill and it's got webbed feet, but it does not have all the qualities of ducks. So don't stereotype that platypus with the rest of the ducks. And probably one of the worst, ad hominem. This is attacking the person making the argument rather than the facts or the argument. You don't want to get in an argument with somebody about science or about some facts or whatever. You see this a lot with some of the young men or young women arguing sports or something like music, and instead of using facts, you say, oh yeah, well you're stupid. Well, that doesn't make any sense. How does that relate to the argument at all? That is a false reasoning. You can't say that your argument is wrong because you don't like the way you're dressed. It's not appropriate, it's not reasoning, and it doesn't show a connection between evidence and a claim, nor does it show maybe the falsehood of the connections. You're not rebutting an argument, you are just being insulting, which is not a way to appropriately argue. We would not be as far along scientifically if someone had looked at Isaac Newton and said, I don't like your hair, you clearly don't know anything about gravity, and just dismissed him. We would have many things wrong with our understanding of the world around us. So don't attack the person making the argument. If we are arguing facts, we are arguing evidence. We are not arguing what you wore to school today. You don't want to appeal to fear. You don't want to try and make someone scared. You want to prove your point. And don't make a false analogy, right? Don't say that something's similar when it's not. That's basically lying. You don't want to do that either. So none of these are good reasoning techniques. You want to follow the good quality patterns of reasoning, proving the link between your evidence and your claim clearly.